Hello, I'm Angela Murphy. You're watching Global Pulse here on Asia 1. It's good to have your company. Well, this week, Rohingya families risk everything on dangerous sea crossings in search of safety. Disease spreads through Gaza's overcrowded camps, adding another humanitarian crisis to the war. Canada counts the cost of Donald Trump's latest tariffs, and millions of years after it ruled the Earth, the Tyrannosaurus Rex is making headlines all over again. So let's begin in Asia. For many Rohingya families trapped in Bangladesh's refugee camps, hope is becoming harder to find. With conditions deteriorating and opportunities disappearing, more are risking dangerous sea journeys despite the growing threat of traffickers, storms and death.
Rahela Begum survived war in Myanmar and life in Bangladesh's largest refugee settlement. But in April, a trafficker promised to treat her like his own sister and took her to Teknaf, about an hour's drive from Cox's Bazar. There, she boarded a crowded trawler. The vessel sank after 4 days at sea, leaving the 20-year-old clinging to a wooden plank in the Andaman Sea for 2 days and a night.
After the boat sank, I emerged from the tarpaulin and saw everyone floating in the sea, clinging to water tanks or whatever they could find. I also saw corpses floating. At that moment, I found a wooden plank and clung to it for 1 night and 2 days.
When news of the disaster emerged a week later, the Bangladesh Coast Guard said 9 people had been found alive, including 6 traffickers. Begum was among a group of about 280 people on the overcrowded boat. She was eventually rescued, but hundreds of others have not been so fortunate. In 2025, more than 6,500 Rohingya attempted to leave the camps by sea. UN reports suggest that 1 in 7 of them were reported dead or missing.
Indeed, we see an increase of cases of trafficking, but also onwards movements. From last year, from January to May, and comparing to this year for the same period, we have seen more than double in number of departures of refugees moving onwards to Malaysia, to Indonesia.
Human trafficking has become a lucrative trade, with recruiters and criminal gangs selling refugees the hope of a better life outside what many describe as an open-air prison. Bangladesh's Coast Guard says it has rescued hundreds of trafficking victims this year, but authorities admit dismantling the networks remains difficult.
To combat the situation, Bangladesh Coast Guard remains on high alert for this kind of situation, like illegal infiltration, narcotics, arms smuggling, human trafficking across all riverine, coastal and maritime borders.
For many Rohingya, the dangerous journeys continue despite the risks. Refugee leaders say only lasting peace in Myanmar can end the desperation driving people to sea.
Sri Lanka is confronting its worst dengue outbreak in years, with hospitals under growing pressure as infections surge across the country. Authorities are turning to drones, military support and aggressive mosquito control in a race to slow the spread.
Health officials are carrying out house-to-house inspections and fogging operations across Sri Lanka, targeting mosquito breeding sites. The Air Force is also using drones to search rooftops for stagnant water where mosquitoes can breed.
The main focus has been getting rid of vector breeding sites and getting rid of vectors by fogging and the usual things. So there's absolutely no doubt that these measures are very, very important. But when you look at the whole world, not just Sri Lanka, these factors alone don't seem to be enough.
Hospitals are struggling to cope with a surge in patients, with more than 18,000 cases recorded in the first 2 weeks of July alone. Doctors and nurses are working longer hours as wards fill with dengue patients, including children.
It's challenging to the doctors because it's a rapid increase of patients. Like all of a sudden you get a big bulk of patients coming into the hospital. So, it's challenging. So, challenging to the doctors, nurses, the health administrators, everyone. So, because you had to use the same resources that we had before.
Health officials say nearly 11,000 mosquito breeding sites have been cleared this month, while thousands of premises have been fined. Authorities are also considering turning to a dengue vaccine, though experts have warned it may confer limited benefits as the virus is complex and several strains are circulating.
Turning our attention to what's been happening this week in the Middle East. For families displaced by the war in Gaza, survival now means more than avoiding the fighting. Overcrowded camps and collapsing sanitation have created the conditions for disease to spread rapidly, leaving doctors struggling to contain another humanitarian emergency. 8-year-old Ruba Sade spends her days confined to a tent in Gaza City, her body covered in inflamed blisters. Health officials say more than 9,300 suspected cases have been recorded across Gaza since early July, most concentrated in the densely packed camps of Khan Yunis.
I used to shower every day, but when we got displaced in the camps, my mother would only pour water on my face. There was no soap, no laundry detergent, no sponge, no shampoo or hand sanitizer. What did we do to deserve living like this with all these rashes, living in tents and not being able to sleep because of the rats?
Doctors say the outbreak is being driven by overcrowding and a lack of clean water. Families often go a week between water deliveries with no soap or cleaning supplies, and with entire families sharing a single tent containing the disease has become nearly impossible.
Given the war and displacement conditions we are experiencing, this isolating patients is practically impossible. It's impossible to isolate the patient from others. Imagine 10 to 15 or 20 people living in a small tent. Where would they find space to isolate the patient?
Aid groups warn Gaza's health system is on the brink of collapse. They say the outbreak will not ease until the root causes of displacement and overcrowding are addressed. Long after the fighting has faded, Syria's cultural scars remain. Specialists are now assessing one of the country's most significant Christian landmarks, hoping that centuries of history can still be preserved for future generations.
At the historic St. Simeon Monastery in northern Syria, the ruins bear the scars of years of conflict, looting, and illegal excavations. Stones scattered around the base of the famous column where St. Simeon's stylites once lived reflect the damage suffered by the 5th century Byzantine site, which is part of the UNESCO-listed ancient villages known as Syria's Dead Cities. A French archaeological delegation recently visited Deir Simon to assess the destruction and explore possible restoration efforts.
This is my first time at St. Simeon after the war to assess the situation and damage and how can we restore it rapidly before documenting everything more accurately.
Archaeologist Micheline Curdy said experts are reviewing old plans and documenting fallen stones to help rebuild damaged sections, including the remains of the main column and surrounding arches. French officials said preserving the site is vital not only for protecting Syria's history, but also for supporting future cultural and tourism efforts through cooperation between Syrian and French heritage institutions.
This heritage is extremely important, not only for Syria's past, but also for its future. It has archaeological importance and a touristic one as well. There will be cooperation between the Syrian Directorate General of Antiquities and Museums and French cultural institutions to help restore the site.
Restoration work at St. Simeon offers hope that Syria's ancient treasures can survive the wounds of war and return as symbols of cultural resilience.
Moving on to Europe now. Italy's longest river is turning green. Along the River Po, soaring temperatures and changing water conditions have triggered an explosion of algae, disrupting life on the water and offering another visible reminder of Europe's warming climate.
Italy's River Po has been overwhelmed by large patches of algae in Turin, where rising temperatures and warmer water conditions have created an environment for rapid plant growth. The thick vegetation has spread across sections of the river near the Vittorio Emanuele, the first bridge, affecting the appearance of the waterway and creating challenges for rowing activities.
Much of this vegetation is invasive and non-native. In other words, it does not originate from our waters, but comes from elsewhere and inhibits, that is, kills biodiversity. So there is a reason why we must combat this invasive vegetation.
Authorities are removing the algae with excavators and barges, sending the collected material for compost production. The situation highlights the growing impact of climate change on local waterways.
The algae enter the waste cycle, so this is also a positive aspect because the algae become part of the organic waste cycle from which we produce compost. To date, we have extracted more than 150 tons of this material at a cost well in excess of 100,000 euros. So these are also costs that the City Council has to bear.
The growing algae problem highlights the impact of changing climate conditions on waterways and urban ecosystems.
It's a tradition that survived for more than 8 centuries. Every summer, conservationists take to the River Thames for the royal swan-upping. Part wildlife survey, part living history, and an important check on the health of Britain's iconic mute swans.
For no reason other than... The centuries-old tradition of swan-upping began on the England's River Thames as officials carried out the annual census of the royal swan population. The 5-day ceremony dating back to the 12th century sees the king's swan marker David Barber and his team travel along a 79-mile stretch of the river in traditional rowing boats to count swans, weigh cygnets, and check the birds for injuries and health problems.
We're here swan-upping today, but swan-upping years and years ago, right back to the 12th century, it was a very important food, served up at banquets and feasts, and you know, people used to be very, very proud of keeping swans. Of course, today, swan-upping is nothing to do with eating swans. It's all about education and conservation.
Once used to identify swans for royal feasts, the event has now become focused on conservation and education. Officials said threats, including bird flu, discarded fishing equipment, and attacks involving catapults and air rifles, continue to affect swan numbers, highlighting the need to protect the iconic birds and their habitat.
Last year, we had 115 young cygnets, but that was quite low compared with sort of 3 or 4 years ago when we were up to about 140, 150. But we've had the problem of bird flu in the winter months, which has taken a lot of breeding pairs have died through that. We also have a lot of shootings with catapults, youngsters with catapults, air rifles, and so that causes another serious problem for us, and hence that's why we're having schools along, so we can try and get these young children to appreciate their wildlife.
The annual swan-upping continues to preserve a historic royal tradition while supporting efforts to safeguard the future of Thames swans.
Well, next on Global Pulse, a sweet surprise brings smiles to children rebuilding their lives after Venezuela's devastating earthquakes. And why Cairo's famous garbage city is becoming one of Egypt's most unexpected success stories.